about peace, I'm asking you to start a war. I'm talking about a war equivalent association.
Fear is a fact of life in big cities of the U.S. today. Fear of burglary, robbery, rape, and other assaults that end in serious injury or senseless violent death. This film is a concentrated examination of that fear. Of course, it must be stated that life in this country is much more than the tales of crime and terror on which our study focuses. But the feelings of fear cannot be ignored, and their importance must be examined and understood. The symptoms surround us. 2, 3, or 4 locks on every apartment door. Old pleasure abandoned because of danger in the streets. The evening bridge game, the nighttime stroll. Instead, there is a new interest in karate and other methods of self-defense and protection. In big cities like New York and Washington, D.C., public buses no longer make change for their passengers. Cash is simply too attractive to hold-up men. Even taxi cabs are beginning to accept credit cards to avoid carrying too much cash. The fear of crime also reaches into the schoolhouse. Los Angeles and New York have hired small armies of guards to protect their students. Some psychologists feel that the fear experienced by Americans actually contributes to the conditions that permit crime to grow. But most Americans have good reason to feel concerned. Statistics provide only a bare skeleton of the daily horror story. In Detroit, the present crime capital of the U.S., 68 out of every 1,000 residents fell victim to some crime of violence, rape, robbery, or assault within a single year. In New York, safest of 13 major cities studied recently, 36 out of every 1,000 residents reported being victimized. Crime remains most serious in ghettos like Harlem and Watts, and fear in these neighborhoods is correspondingly high. But crime has also spread into middle-class residential areas and the suburbs. No one is entirely safe. The fear of crime is further heightened by the nation's explosive racial problem. Blacks are the most frequent victims of black criminals, but it is the whites who see themselves as the major targets. The nightmare continues despite the most comprehensive and costly assault ever launched against street crime. Police forces around the nation have increased their numbers and introduced a variety of new crime-fighting equipment from helicopters to computers. But everyone who remains in the city must come to terms with fear in order to survive, psychologically as well as physically. They make dozens of adjustments in their daily lives to protect themselves. Most urban dwellers seem to accept the possibility, even the probability, of being victimized. Often they do so with a look of resignation that says fear is the price we pay for the advantages of the big city. Greenwich Village in Lower Manhattan has become a prime hunting ground for muggers, burglars, and young toughs who get their kicks from senseless attacks on passerbys. After one series of brutal murders, this group of village residents banded together to demand more police protection.
We knew this girl who was murdered at 494 Hudson Street, and we're just getting a little bit tired of it. And this is it.
I'm here for a very selfish reason. I don't want to die. I want to live.
Well, I was mugged once in the Bronx, but it has happened around here, and someone was raped in the building I live now last year. And I don't dare leave the house once I come home from work.
I have to turn around when I go into my house, keep my key out when I unlock the door, look under the staircase before I open my own door.
Has anything happened to you?
Not to me personally, but it has happened in my building twice in the past year.
What has happened?
A woman was attacked on the stairs with a knife. I opened my door and that scared him off. And another time a girl was attacked under the staircase with a knife. No one came then.
I want my police officer in uniform and walking the beat. And that's where they should be.
Solution, I think, better patrolling.
Mario Delmonico, you think he's
Better patrolling. People more interested. People getting out in their community.
In recent years, all around New York, the old foot patrolman has been replaced by radio-equipped police cars that can cover more ground and respond more quickly to any emergency. Their flashing lights and shrill sirens have become hallmarks of city life. But the current spiraling of city fears seems to make citizens long for a return to the comforting sight of a neighborhood cop on the beat. They're tired of feeling alone and afraid.
Well, I
to say I don't like being held up at knife point very much. I've had hundreds of dollars of material stolen in the last few years, so I can get along without the crime.
I was hit for no reason, just beat up. They didn't even want my money.
Senseless attacks are the most frightening of all. An article in the New York Times about one such incident drew a flood of sympathetic letters. They showed writer Richard Lingman that beatings like the one he suffered for no apparent reason are not uncommon in New York City.
Mr. Richard R. Lingman's account of the senseless attack on him was of special interest to me. Something similar recently happened to my wife. She, too, was struck without warning or obvious motive, and she was not robbed. But it did not happen during the small hours of the morning as it did with Mr. Lingman. It happened on a bright, sunny day at about 5:10 in the afternoon in front of a high-rise luxury apartment with a serene display of fountains. He goes on, there were about a series of x-rays, and we decided on a sedative. Oh, he says, too, like Mr. Lingman, I, too, enjoy walking around Manhattan at all hours. I don't intend to give it up. But if you decide to print this letter, I don't want more than my initials signed to it, if you please. There are times when my wife still walks around the city unescorted. I don't know what kind of ideas a letter like this may plant in a drug-crazed mind. I have to assume that some of the bully boys, as Mr. Lingman calls them, in his comparison with pre-Hitler Germany, may know how to read. I remember in a story by J.D. Salinger, he was talking about his, the character in the story was talking about his neighborhood in New York, and he said, for Christ's sake, I got run over in the streets out here. And the same way I can say, well, I got mugged on the streets here. And so in a way, it's a service stripe of being a New Yorker, that you get mugged. So it's nothing pleasant or anything you're proud of, but it's part of paying your dues, I guess. Now, I don't like to walk the streets late at night. I think it's, you know, I have this feeling that someone will walk up behind me, and when I do have to be out late, I still go out late if I have to, and but I have this sense of someone coming up behind me, so I look back every now and then.
All right, remember, the junkies must go. The junkies must go. The pushers must go.
One of the angriest debates between village residents today is over the problem of drug addiction and whether local centers for the treatment of drug addicts are good for the community. These young people, not addicts themselves, say yes. There's no proof, they argue, that the neighborhood drug center has become a hideout for addicts, muggers, and vandals. But most of the crowd says no.
What? I'm worried about New York City. Before we get the hell out of here, all of us. I think we've had enough, and the policemen would like us to move on, and we should, so we can open up the street. I'm a reporter for WHBI. I live in the village. I'm just as scared as anybody else. The police need help, and we hope we help them. If they do need help and they can't help us, why don't we form some sort of a citizens action group? It's a dirty word. It's a bad word. But if we have to protect ourselves, let's do it. Vigilantes are necessary.
Vigilante justice, the kind doled out by citizens who take the law into their own hands, has deep roots in American history, although it is hardly one of the nation's proudest traditions. Violence has bred worse violence at the hands of reckless vigilante bands, and innocent men often ended up hanging from a rope. Like so many ingrained national traditions, vigilantism stems from the earliest days of the frontier. The nation's first settlers, fighting the wilderness with no protection from organized law enforcement, quickly came to depend on themselves, and this tradition retains its appeal, even to this day. On the frontier, a man's first responsibility was to protect his own family and property. But one man alone could not do enough, so the frontiersmen banded together with their neighbors to help and protect one another, forming posses to hunt down horse thieves and murderers. And of course there were the Indians, the red peril of the plains. As history now shows, it was the Indian who suffered most at the hands of the marauding, land-hungry white men. But some psychologists believe that those early frontier fears of the so-called savage, racially different, culturally primitive, poor and oppressed, live on today in the prejudices of whites against blacks and other racial minorities. Why should the frontiers still have such a hold? One reason is that great institution, the Western movie. Over the years, these films have helped to explain America to Americans and the rest of the world as well. Perhaps the best proof of this is the continued American fascination with firearms and the staggering stockpile of rifles and guns with which Americans insist on surrounding themselves. After all, there is no more glorified national hero than the cowboy, the man with the six-gun. The pistol became an enduring symbol of rugged individualism and romantic self-defense, and America's dedication to the gun remains one of the last vestiges of frontier tradition. But ironically, the pistol that was meant to protect a man against his enemies on the frontier has turned into one of the greatest dangers in today's urban society. Readily at hand in all too many situations, guns are often used instead of fists when Americans begin fighting in barrooms and living rooms. The result is a dreadful loss of life in situations that should only produce blackened eyes and broken bones. Still, many Americans are blind to the fact that the weapons they cling to for self-defense are themselves a source of anxiety and fear, as this current television commercial suggests.
If there's a gun in your house and you're worried about accidents, let me tell you about a new kind of lock for it.
It's called the Master Gun Lock. It's a real lock. It covers the trigger so the gun can't shoot. And it'll fit almost any gun. Don't take a chance on an accident. Get a Master Gun Lock and get some peace of mind.
The most civilized and productive form of America's vigilante spirit in the big cities today is the Neighborhood Block Association with its annual block fair. Here on Manhattan's fast-developing Upper West Side, where whites, blacks, Puerto Ricans, and Orientals live side by side, block associations are working to get residents to meet and understand each other better.
Why pay $90 to go to Puerto Rico, get mugged and get mugged? Pay 25 cents, stay in New York and learn Spanish. 2 for 45 cents, round trip to Spain, 2 for 45 cents. If you don't speak Spanish, you'll be cha-chaing down 71st Street if you listen to this. 2 for 45 cents.
Block associations generally meet one evening a week to discuss the problems of the area and raise money for a wide variety of projects. They plant trees, organize neighborhood cleanup days, and install special high-intensity lighting to deter street crime. In some places, the city government itself provides money to support these projects. Probably the most colorful activity of the Block Association is its annual fair. At block parties like this one, residents can stroll through their streets buying snacks and handicrafts and enjoying entertainment provided by the neighbors. But fear is not forgotten. Some form of crime-fighting equipment is generally on display, and in New York, city-supported street theater groups often perform. They dramatize the problems faced by overworked police and underscore the need for citizens to help themselves in the fearful fight against crime.
There's a lot of activity in the 620th precinct. The crime is really going wild. Yeah, we're receiving a lot of complaints. So many.
We're hoping to allay our fears by having the people join the association and get to know each other, so people just don't jump when they see a stranger in the street.
You know, on the outside of your door, if you're looking from the hallway at your door, you got a cylinder there that you put the key in. Well, most of the burglars, they don't pick that and open the door. They take a crowbar, they stick it behind here and just pull the whole thing out. So what you do is you get a steel plate. There's a woman on this block with like $300 worth of locks on her door. She didn't have any of these on it. And they pulled the cylinders out. We're selling these for $250. This block association, this particular project, I guess people did start out of some kind of fear. It's a very real thing. It's, you know, when I first got involved, I said it's paranoia, you know, but after going door to door and listening to different people give me all their bad experiences, it not only became to be a big drag, but I realized it was real. there is a big problem with security. I saw the statistics on this street. It's like 1/4 of a mile. You wouldn't believe how many burglaries there are, how many rapes and muggings. And what we're trying to do today is raise the money to protect ourselves a little more. That's one of the answers, I suppose.
We live in fear.
I'm sorry?
We live in fear. And I told people, put L bars on your door, little iron pieces that are bolted in. A guy cannot get a credit card in. Forget it. They just cannot go in. And you have a door downstairs with the same kind of thing. Plus, in our building, the chap who lives downstairs has got 2 poodles. He hears any noise that he doesn't recognize, immediately the dog's and that's going to be a deterrent for anybody who tries to come in.
We bought him for protection. We were broken into twice in my apartment while I was there. The doorman on duty, he wouldn't stop anyone from coming in. He said that it wasn't his job.
His name is Ripper, and he's an English Mastiff. He's about 10.5 months old now and will grow to be about twice his size, about 235 pounds. I was robbed 4 times successively and had quite a few things that were mementos that were stolen from me. And I feared for my life because 2 of the robberies took place while I was in the house and I slept through them.
I've lived in the city for 9 years. I've had about 4 different apartments, and I've been robbed 6 times in 9 years, and this does not include the time they stole my bag in Central Park.
If you're young and you're male, you're fairly safe. Although I do know people my age, my sex, in the city who've been robbed.
Charlie Chopper is still on the loose. Police are still looking for him. The boys are all scared to death of what happens all over the Avenue of Amsterdam.
Charlie Chopper was the frightful nickname given to a homicidal maniac who preyed on young boys in New York City's Upper West Side and Harlem neighborhoods. The body of one dead boy, Luis Ortiz, was found brutally beaten and mutilated in a basement just 1 block from his home. The boy's mother decided to take the rest of her children back home to the island of Puerto Rico. But for those youngsters who remain, schools in the neighborhood have made the killings a lesson to be studied alongside reading, writing, and arithmetic.
It all started when he was sent to the store to buy milk and never came back. The people say that the boy must have known his killer. The day after the boy was murdered, there was a big demonstration at the 24th precinct because this was the 3rd murder in the neighborhood. The boy's body, Luis Ortiz, was flown to Puerto Rico with his family.
Even the city's youngest residents are taught to live with fear. The police department, in cooperation with the school board, supplies motion pictures and safety lecturers to help youngsters avoid danger on the street. The most important lesson is never talk to a stranger.
We're here more or less to educate you or give you some hints on safety precautions when and if you do go to the store for your parents.
1, do not talk to strangers. 2, do not go into buildings or on an elevator with anyone you do not know. 3, do not accept any offers of sweets, money, etc. from strangers. 4, children should not be outdoors alone after dark. 5, check that children
Expensive private schools pick up youngsters by car in the morning and bring them home safely at night. But most parents cannot afford that luxury, and they must cope with the problem of their children's safety themselves.
I'm trying my best to protect my kids because I have to come every morning and pick them up, and I have to come back every afternoon and pick them up. And I have children that's in school 3 different hours in the day. One gets out at 11:20, one gets out at 12, and the other one at 3. So I'm here 3 times a day every day because I don't want anything to happen to my kids.
In many middle-class neighborhoods, the Parents League of New York has organized effective child safety campaigns. Besides volunteering to patrol the streets, watching over their youngsters and directing traffic, these parents have arranged with local stores so that children who become lost or fearful can come in and use the telephone to call for help.
There are antisocial older kids who gang up on them, take their bus passes or their school bags, and there are sick adults who do approach children usually with some sexual intent, and I don't think that's too cool. I'd rather avoid that situation than have it happen to them.
I feel they're most afraid of a mugging incident and most afraid that it will become the kind of incident where it won't simply be a hand over whatever the perpetrator desires, but it will be with a weapon. And that if a child momentarily fumbles in his pocket or might not be able to find the bus pass or the token or the whatever it is, it might be too late for that child. I think that's a real fear. I think it's a real fear for adults and children.
I'm offering a personal $200 reward for the arrest and conviction of this man. He's a rapist, black male, medium brown complected, 6'1", weighed about 160 pounds.
For more than half the country's population, women, there's a very special kind of fear, the fear of rape. Statistics show that rape is on the rise in big cities today, although more than half of all attacks probably go unreported. One reason for this is that until very recently, most local laws made it embarrassing, sometimes terrifying for a woman to report an incident to the police. Was she really raped? They demanded. Had she resisted despite all threats of violence? Could she prove it? These requirements are slowly being lifted in New York and several other cities, but many victims are still too frightened or ashamed to report the crime. The problem is especially serious for teenage girls, who constitute the largest number of rape victims. If they're too afraid to tell their parents, they risk the dangers of pregnancy or venereal disease. Perhaps the healthiest development in this area is the degree to which rape is now being brought out of the shadows of silence and guilt, largely as a result of the woman's liberation movement. Indeed, there is hardly a city in the country today where the subject of rape and how to prevent it is not being discussed at women's organizations, college campuses, or on radio talk shows like this one, which takes telephone calls from its listeners.
Until this month in New York, women had to submit to vaginal examination, produce smears of semen, or find a witness to corroborate her testimony that she had been raped. No corroboration has been needed for robbery or assault. Of the approximately 4.5 million women residents of greater the New York area, just over 4,000 cases of rape were reported to the police last year. Half as many men were arrested and a tiny % convicted. The brutal act of rape, a crime against women, is very much under discussion. It's tonight's topic, and if you've been raped, fear rape, or plan on raping, or even plan on being raped, stay tuned and join the conversation.
Well, in New York, we find that most rapists fit in the age group of 20 to 29, and we also know that most rapes happen in the ghetto areas in the city, so therefore we know they were on the lower economic scale. But outside of that, it's really all types of people who will commit rape.
As far as I know, any man could be a rapist. Anybody who is, might have a problem dealing with women is a potential rapist. I think a large number of men who do rape women don't like women. They're afraid of them or they hate them.
You're on the air.
Hello?
Yes?
I'm a male chauvinist pig, and I raped 2 girls and got away with it. One in an alley, one in a park. I also hate them because they all tell me that my ding-a-ling is a little too small. You got any suggestions?
I hope that you can find help.
Why? It seems very puzzling. Why are there so many rapes? After all, prostitution is everywhere, and girls, even who are not prostitutes, are not that unwilling. We live in very permissive times. It's not that hard to find someone for sexual relations. I think the reason is that rapists are not so much out to gratify some sexual desire. They are out to gratify their anger. To rape a girl is to humiliate her. It is not just taking away something that is hers, her property or her money. It is basically taking her intactness, her integrity, making her, at least temporarily, a slave. And that is what the rapist wants.